The fall that frees you. Picture this: the life you spent years constructing, your routines, your dreams, your ambitions, suddenly feels foreign. The mask you wore so well begins to slip, and before you know it, the person you thought you were vanishes like smoke in the wind. But what if the scariest part isn't the loss of your identity, but the realization that maybe you never truly knew who you were in the first place? Carl Jung called this the death of the persona, the moment when the face you showed the world finally crumbles. It can arrive through a spiritual awakening, a breakup, a traumatic event, or even a slow emotional erosion built up over years. One way or another, something inside you collapses, and at first it feels liberating, like shedding heavy armor, like breathing for the first time. But after the rush of release comes the quiet, a silence not filled with peace but with absence. No goals, no desire, no sense of who you are or why you should even get out of bed. Not depression exactly, not despair, just nothingness. A blank field where your former self used to grow wild. And this is where most people get stuck, not in the fall, but in what follows. We've been sold a myth that awakening is glorious, radiant, full of purpose and clarity. But Jung knew better. He knew that to wake up to the truth often means watching everything false in you burn down. He understood that enlightenment isn't light, it's the fire that clears the forest. It's messy, lonely, disorienting. It's lying on the floor of your life wondering why nothing moves you anymore. And yet this emptiness is not a punishment. It's a transition. It's the space between what was and what could be. What falls apart was never meant to last. What survives is what's real. That void you feel, it's not a failure, it's an invitation. But it requires that you stop searching for the old you, because they're not coming back. The persona you lost, the image, the identity, the roles you played was never truly you. It was the version of you shaped by fear, approval-seeking, survival instincts. Jung taught that beneath this mask lies the self deeper, wilder, more whole. But to reach it, you must stop performing. You must sit still in the silence long enough to hear something other than your own conditioning. This is the place of initiation, the void. And most of us panic here. We rush to rebuild. We look for new goals, new identities, new distractions. We want to feel productive, useful, alive. But what if the only way out is through? What if this time, instead of performing your way forward, you surrendered your way inward? The truth is, soul doesn't move on schedule. It doesn't shout over your doubts. It speaks in whispers, in dreams, in impulses, in strange longings that make no logical sense. It won't fight for your attention. It waits for your invitation. And until you slow down, until you stop forcing progress, you'll never hear what it's trying to say. So if you're here in this strange, still void, good, you're exactly where you need to be. No, it doesn't feel good, but it's not supposed to. Real transformation asks for your discomfort, not because pain is the goal, but because everything that isn't true in you will fight to survive. You don't need a plan right now. You need presence. You need patience. You need the courage to sit with the unraveling without trying to stitch yourself back together too quickly. You need to grieve the persona that once protected you, even as you gently welcome the self that's waiting behind it. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This right now is that moment. The moment where you stop calling it fate and start choosing something deeper. A path not built by ambition, but by alignment. A voice that isn't rehearsed but remembered. A face not made for the world, but made for you. This isn't the end. It's the initiation. And it begins in silence. Stay there a little longer. The real you is just beginning to speak. Void between selves. After the fall, what remains is not clarity but fog. Not a roadmap but a vast field without signs. It's not depression, not apathy. It's something harder to name, a weightless kind of heaviness. You don't want to do anything, but you also don't want to feel nothing. You're not in pain, not exactly. You're just blank. And that blankness unnerves you. What used to drive you no longer makes sense. Success, status, recognition. These once gave you direction, but now they feel hollow. You look at your goals and they seem like artifacts from a past life. You can't fake ambition anymore. You can't talk yourself into caring. Motivation hasn't vanished, it's just that the version of you who used to crave it is gone. This is where many people either run backward or numb forward. We try to reignite the fire using old fuel, vision boards, positive affirmations, productivity hacks, but none of it sticks. Why? Because you don't lack energy. You lack someone to be energized for. The you who used to respond to those tactics is no longer at the wheel. Carl Jung knew this space well. He saw it not as a dead end, but a turning point. He called it the beginning of individuation, the slow, sometimes painful emergence of the true self. It's not about building a better version of your persona. It's about dissolving the lie that you ever needed one in the first place. Individuation is not self-improvement, it's self-reclamation. You stop asking, who should I be, and start listening to, who have I always been underneath all this noise? But that listening doesn't begin with answers. It begins with allowing the silence, the confusion, the disorientation. This is what makes it hard. The ego thrives on structure and reward. The soul, on the other hand, speaks in paradox. It moves in spirals. It's quiet, non-linear. It doesn't promise results, it invites depth. And so in the void, the ego panics. It tells you you're wasting time falling behind broken. But that's only because it's dying and ego fights to survive. What if you believed you're not broken? What if this lost feeling isn't a flaw in your journey, but the most essential part of it? Not a pause, but a pivot. What if everything that feels unfamiliar right now is just the shape of your real self coming into focus? Jung wrote, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. That doesn't mean suffering for its own sake. It means the kind of discomfort that arises when illusions shatter, when the truth walks in uninvited and you don't yet have the language to welcome it. That's the pain of becoming, the ache of expansion. If you're in the fog now drifting without form, understand this, you are not lazy. You are not failing. You are in transition. Your psyche is recalibrating. The software of your life is uninstalling old code. And until the new system boots up, it's okay to feel offline. But this isn't a shutdown, it's a reset. The self isn't dormant, it's watching, listening, waiting for your readiness to surrender the need to perform healing and instead embody truth. And truth isn't always inspiring. Sometimes it's mundane. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's waking up and not knowing what to do, but still being willing to sit in that uncertainty. Let the stillness teach you. Let the fog humble you. Let the silence expand you. Because on the other side of this void, there's not a better version of who you used to be. There's someone you've never met, someone you've always been. So don't rush to be found. Learn how to stay lost with grace. In that stillness, something sacred begins to form. Not because you chased it, but because you made space for it to emerge. The resistance within. You're in the void. You've let the old self dissolve. You're not who you were, and you're not yet who you're becoming. But here's what's strange. This space, this emptiness is exhausting. Even though you're doing less, everything feels heavier. Every thought feels sticky. Every action feels like it's happening in slow motion. You wonder, why am I so tired if I'm not doing anything? And in that question lies the trap. Because you are doing something, you're resisting, not actively, not with loud defiance, but in the quiet, subtle background tension of trying to feel different than you do. You don't just feel tired, you feel ashamed of being tired. You don't just feel unmotivated, you judge yourself for it. And that inner resistance, that battle to be somewhere else, drains you. Carl Jung understood this phenomenon deeply. What you resist not only persists, he said, but will grow in size. He wasn't being poetic. He was describing the laws of the psyche. When we push away a feeling, we don't delete it, we fracture ourselves. We create a split, a war inside. The very energy we need to heal becomes trapped in defending against the discomfort. So here's a radical question. What if you stopped resisting? What if just for today you allowed yourself to be exactly as you are, tired, uncertain, uninspired, and you didn't make it a problem? What if you let the discomfort exist, not as something to fix, but as something to feel? No analyzing, no improving, just sitting with what is. It sounds counterproductive. It sounds passive. But this surrender isn't giving up, it's opening up. Because beneath every feeling we label bad is a message. And you can't hear that message when you're fighting to change the station. Imagine this, you're lying in bed. Your to-do list is untouched. Your body feels like lead. A voice in your head starts shouting, "Why are you like this?" You're wasting time, but instead of engaging that voice, you take a deep breath and say, "Right now I feel heavy." And that's okay. And in that moment, something shifts. The inner critic loses its grip. Your body softens. The fog doesn't lift immediately, but a crack appears. A sliver of curiosity, maybe even a flicker of desire not to achieve, but to move. This is what Jung would call shadow integration. The tiredness, the laziness, the lack of motivation. These aren't your enemies. They are fragments of yourself calling for inclusion. When you stop labeling them as problems, they begin to transmute. Not because you forced a change, but because you created space for one. Children do this intuitively. They cry when they're sad. They stomp when they're angry. And 5 minutes later, they're laughing. They don't get stuck because they don't resist the wave. But we're taught to override that flow. We learn that crying is weakness. Anger is dangerous. Stillness is laziness. And so we repress. And what we repress becomes the shadow. And your shadow, it holds immense power. Your creativity, your energy, your authenticity, it all lives in the parts you've rejected. When you suppress your truth, you don't kill it. You just bury it. And buried energy festers. It turns into anxiety, fatigue, lack of motivation. Not because there's nothing inside you, but because you've blocked access to it. So if you're feeling stuck, uninspired, numb, don't try to push through. Sit down, get quiet. Ask yourself gently, what am I resisting? What part of me have I judged unworthy of being felt? Then breathe and let it speak. Because the resistance is not your weakness, it's the doorway. And what's waiting on the other side is real momentum. Not the kind that comes from hype or willpower, but the kind that flows naturally when you stop fighting yourself. You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're just tired of pretending to be someone you're not. And the moment you stop pretending, your real self begins to move. Embracing the shadow. By now, something subtle may have started to shift. Not in grand cinematic gestures, but in quiet moments. A loosening, a softening. The tiniest cracks forming in the wall of resistance. And through those cracks, something honest begins to seep in. Not motivation exactly, more like awareness. A feeling that maybe what you've been calling a block is actually a message. Let's talk about that message. The world taught you that your energy should always move forward. Build something, fix something, improve something. So when your inner world slows down, stalls, or collapses, your instinct is to judge it. You ask, what's wrong with me? But Carl Jung might answer, nothing. Something's finally trying to be seen. When we resist discomfort, fatigue, sadness, fear, we don't eliminate it. We exile it. We shove it into the unconscious where it doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits until we're quiet enough, still enough, vulnerable enough to feel it again. This exiled energy is what Jung called the shadow. Not because it's evil, but because it lives in the dark corners of our psyche, hidden from view, stripped of sunlight. But here's the paradox. The shadow is not our flaw. It's our fuel. Every trait you've suppressed, your anger, your grief, your laziness, your confusion, holds power. Real power. The kind that doesn't come from performance, but from presence. And when you stop labeling these traits as bad or wrong, they begin to reveal their true form. Sadness isn't weakness. It's honesty. It's your soul mourning something ungrieved. Anger isn't destruction. It's a boundary that was crossed, a truth that wasn't heard. Laziness isn't failure. It's exhaustion from years of chasing things that never really fed you. And fear is your nervous system trying to protect you, maybe not accurately, but with good intent. The path forward isn't about conquering these states. It's about dialoguing with them. Jung believed that every emotion we avoid becomes part of the unconscious. But when we bring them into the light, they don't just lose their power to sabotage us, they start collaborating with us. So ask yourself, what have I been afraid to feel? Maybe it's the grief of losing your ambition. Maybe it's the guilt of letting go of an identity that once earned you love. Maybe it's the fear that without constant striving, you'll disappear. These are not signs of weakness, they are signs of awakening. The truth is, your shadow isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to return you to yourself. Let's make this real. You wake up and feel that heavy weight again, the familiar fog, and instead of jumping to fix it, you pause. You breathe. You say there's tiredness here today, and I'm going to listen to it instead of escaping it. In that pause, you create space, and in that space, something stirs. A thought, a feeling, an urge to write, to move, to walk, to weep. That's not manufactured motivation. That's life force finally being allowed to flow. And creativity lives there in the mess, the paradox, the contradiction. The poet in you isn't waiting for the perfect mood. They're waiting for permission. The artist in you isn't blocked, they're bound. And every time you feel a negative emotion, that artist is tapping on the walls asking to be let out. So try this play with the paradox. Write a poem titled Fueled by Laziness. Sketch the shape of your sadness. Dance your anxiety. Let the discomfort be the brush, the melody, the ink. Because when you stop resisting your darkness, you begin collaborating with your wholeness. The shadow doesn't need to be fixed, it needs to be felt. And when it is, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes expression, momentum, art, truth. You are not here to be perfect, you are here to be real. And real people feel deeply. They stumble, they rage, they rest, they write from wounds and build from confusion. That's not dysfunction, that's depth. So if today you feel off, don't fight it. Get curious, sit with it, speak to it. Let your resistance become your ritual. Because it's not blocking the path, it is the path. The power of paradox. There's a strange thing that happens when you stop running from what you feel. Your imagination wakes up. And not in some polished Instagram aesthetic way, in a raw, unpredictable human way. What once looked like dysfunction begins to feel like poetry. What once felt like stagnation starts to pulse with creative tension. This is the hidden magic of paradox. The very states we've been taught to escape laziness, sadness, fear contain the exact raw material of transformation. Not because they're pleasant, but because they're true. And the soul doesn't work in logic, it works in truth. Jung understood this intimately. He believed the unconscious speaks to us in symbols, stories, contradictions. It doesn't lecture, it dreams. So the question is, can you learn to dream again right in the middle of your uncertainty? Try this experiment. Take the emotion you're most ashamed of today, let's say exhaustion, and instead of trying to overcome it, write a story in which exhaustion is the hero. Maybe it's a spirit who shows up at your doorstep not to rob you of time, but to return you to stillness. Maybe it carries a lantern leading you deeper into the forest of your real desires. What you'll find in that creative act isn't just catharsis, it's connection. The resistance you felt starts shifting into curiosity. You're not just surviving the void, you're starting to speak from it. And that shift changes everything. Jung called this process the transcendent function, the symbolic bridge between your conscious and unconscious minds. It's what allows something new to emerge, not because you figured it out, but because you held space for both sides of yourself. The logic and the longing, the stillness and the stirrings, the grief and the growth. When you engage the paradox, not resolve it, but play with it, you access what Jung called the symbolic life. This is where real transformation happens, not in the straight lines of reason, but in the spirals of metaphor. You stop trying to define yourself and you start expressing yourself. And expression doesn't always look grand. Sometimes it's scribbling nonsense in a notebook. Sometimes it's crying for no reason and calling it prayer. Sometimes it's cleaning your space not out of duty, but because your body wants sacredness around it. These small acts are not meaningless. They are rituals of return. Return to what? To the part of you that was never broken, never optimized, never measured by output. The you who lived in wonder, not spreadsheets. Who felt deeply, not efficiently. Who existed before the need to make something of yourself drown that existence in ambition. The paradox is this: you find your way forward not by chasing progress, but by listening inward. Not by fixing your state, but by feeling it fully. The mess becomes the map. Let's say today you feel scared. You want to move forward, but the thought of putting yourself out there feels like a cliff. What if you turn that fear into dialogue? What if you asked it, what are you here to protect? You might be surprised at the answer. It's not always sabotage. Sometimes it's love, misguided, clumsy, but real. When you befriend the parts of you that seem like obstacles, they stop blocking you. They start guiding you. This is not motivational fluff. This is spiritual mechanics. The psyche is not linear. It doesn't heal in straight lines. It cycles. It deepens. It contradicts itself. And every time you choose curiosity over judgment, you deepen the dialogue. You begin living with yourself, not against yourself. So when you feel resistance tomorrow or 10 minutes from now, don't ask how to destroy it. Ask how to dance with it. What if that's your next creative project? A duet with your doubt, a lullaby for your laziness, a love letter to your confusion. You don't have to believe in this for it to work. You just have to stay open to the whispers, the symbols, the strange but tender truths rising from the parts of you you once silenced. Because here's the truth, you are not meant to be perfect. You are meant to be whole, and wholeness includes the shadows, includes the tension, includes the paradoxes that make you beautifully, impossibly human. The self emerges. There comes a moment, often quiet, almost unnoticeable, when the fog doesn't lift, but something stirs beneath it. A flicker, a hunch, a half-felt pull towards something you can't name. You might be folding laundry, staring at the ceiling, walking through the same neighborhood you've passed 100 times, and suddenly you feel a shift. Not motivation, not purpose, just a whisper of realness. This is the self not knocking but nudging. Jung didn't use the word self casually. He meant something far beyond personality, identity, or even ego. The self is the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, past and potential. It's not what the world sees. It's what you came here to be. And after the ego crumbles, after the persona dies, the self begins its slow emergence. Not as a voice shouting instructions, but as an inner resonance, a subtle alignment. This is where the journey turns inward, not to analyze, but to listen. You might not have answers yet. You might not know your next move. But suddenly that silence inside you doesn't feel quite as empty. It feels pregnant with something, a story, a feeling, a truth. And while your mind might still crave clarity, the deeper part of you, the one that just survived an ego death, knows that clarity isn't what you need next. What you need is trust. Trust in what? In the strange intelligence of your own psyche, in the symbolic language of dreams, in the tiny urges that seem to make no sense but feel deeply right. Call a friend, rearrange your room, buy a plant, open a blank page and type 3 nonsensical lines. These aren't distractions, they're breadcrumbs left by the self, leading you back to yourself. Our culture doesn't prepare us for this way of living. It tells us to follow plans, chase metrics, execute tasks. But the self doesn't speak in bullet points. It speaks in symbols. And if you're waiting for it to present a step-by-step blueprint, you'll miss its soft invitations. This is why Jung valued the unconscious so much. He didn't see it as a threat or a place of chaos. He saw it as the soil of the soul, rich, wild, alive, and yes, sometimes scary, but only because we were taught to fear what we don't immediately understand. If you're in this space now where your soul is beginning to speak in whispers, honor it. Even if the whispers feel strange, even if they disrupt your plans, even if they call you to sit in silence when the world demands speed, especially then, because this is the self saying, let me guide now. And here's the truth, the self doesn't guide through pressure. It guides through resonance. You don't have to force action. You just have to notice when something feels true, even if it makes no logical sense. That's not delusion. That's alignment. The kind you can't fake or fabricate. The kind that doesn't come from striving, but from remembering. And yes, it's hard to trust that, especially in a world that rewards hustle and treats intuition like woo-woo nonsense. Especially when bills still exist, relationships still need tending, and your phone keeps lighting up with the demands of modern life. Of course you tighten. Of course you hesitate. That doesn't mean you're wrong, it means you're human. But this path, this soul path, isn't about abandoning structure. It's about infusing it with spirit. Jung never said the ego was the enemy. He said the ego must serve the self. Your routines, let them hold space for your becoming. Your work, let it reflect your values, not just your skills. Your rest, let it be sacred, not shameful. Because when your structure supports your soul, you don't need to hustle for motivation. You become a vessel for momentum. So when the self stirs, follow it, gently, bravely, quietly. And when doubt creeps in, remember this transformation isn't about knowing. It's about allowing. You don't have to understand everything to trust the next right step. You've met the part of you that can survive the void. Now meet the part of you that knows how to rise from it. Integration and action. So here you are, no longer shattered, but still not quite whole. You've survived the ego death. You've learned to sit with your stillness, to hold space for your shadow, to hear the quiet voice of the self. But now something else begins to awaken the urge to move, to act, to build again. And this time it feels different. It's not the frantic drive to chase approval or resume a polished identity. It's not ambition masquerading as healing. It's something subtler, more sacred. You want to create not for validation, but for expression. You want to move not to outrun yourself, but to align with what's finally true. But here's where many fall into a trap. They think now is the time to leave behind the inner work, to get back to the real world. They assume the integration is complete because the silence has passed. But in truth, this is the most delicate part of the journey, the space where your inner truth must learn how to meet outer reality. Jung never taught that the ego should be destroyed. He knew that a healthy ego is essential for navigating life. What he did teach was that the ego should not lead, it should serve. Serve the self. And that means your actions must come from your soul, not for your image. So how do you build a life that reflects your transformation without turning your healing into a performance? You start small. You start slow. You let the sacred show up in the mundane. Instead of asking, what should I do, ask, what feels honest today, not what's impressive, not what's productive, just what feels true. Maybe that's writing a page, calling someone you've been thinking about, taking a walk without a podcast in your ears, washing your dishes like you're preparing a temple. These small acts are not insignificant. They are how soul becomes structure. You also begin to notice what no longer fits. Certain routines, relationships, roles, they may have made sense for the old you, but now they feel tight, like trying to wear clothes you outgrew. And the mistake many make here is to force themselves back into those garments out of loyalty or fear. But you don't owe the world your past self. You owe it your truth. And that means some things will fall away, gently or dramatically. That's not regression, that's integrity. Let this phase be messy. Let it be inconsistent. There will be days when you feel on fire with purpose, and others when you feel flat again. That's not failure, that's integration. Your psyche is learning to trust this new rhythm. Your nervous system is recalibrating. Your ego is learning how to walk in step with the self instead of ahead of it. The temptation to speed up will come. You'll feel the pull to prove that you're better now that you've figured it out. But the self doesn't care about appearances. It cares about congruence. Are you living from your core? Are your actions an echo of your inner world? Let your routines evolve. Let your days reflect your becoming, not just in what you do, but in how you do it. With presence, with slowness, with permission to be human. And remember, you're not trying to become someone new. You're learning how to be who you've always been, without the masks, without the noise, without the need to impress anyone, even yourself. This is what it means to live soul first. It's not glamorous. It's not always exciting, but it is deeply satisfying. It's the kind of life that doesn't need applause to feel worthy, the kind of progress that doesn't demand perfection, the kind of truth that speaks quietly and moves mountains over time. So as you step forward, ask yourself, what does it look like to act from alignment? What does it mean to build from my center, not from my fear? And can I trust that the smallest, most ordinary steps taken with soul will take me exactly where I'm meant to go? Because that's what this chapter's about. Not a comeback, not a breakthrough, but a return to integrity, to embodied truth, to living as the self, one breath, one choice, one day at a time. Embodying the self, this is where it all begins, not ends. Because real transformation doesn't conclude with fireworks or finality. It continues quietly in the way you speak to yourself when no one's listening, in the way you move through your morning, in the questions you now dare to ask. You've let your old self fall. You've floated through the void. You've wrestled with resistance, befriended the shadow, followed the soft urgings of the self. And now you arrive at the most sacred frontier of all embodiment. This isn't the part where you ascend or finally figure it out. This is where you live it. It's tempting to think that because you've experienced depth, you're somehow done. But the truth is, the spiritual ego can be just as seductive as the original. It whispers, you're awakened now. You should be above all this. But you're not above anything. You're in it. You're human. And that's not a flaw. It's the assignment. So what does it mean to embody the self? It means making space for the soul in the structure of your life. It means your calendar holds both discipline and softness. It means your boundaries aren't rigid walls, but conscious choices. It means your work, your words, your relationships carry a frequency, not of performance, but of presence. It means your rest is no longer a reward, it's a right. It's not stolen between bursts of productivity, it's woven into the rhythm of your becoming. It means letting creativity flow when it wants to, not to produce, but to express. It means letting yourself cry without apology, laugh without restraint, feel without fear. And when resistance returns as it will, you greet it not as an enemy, but as an old teacher. You ask, what are you trying to show me now? Because you know now every tension is an invitation. Every shadow is a doorway. Every still moment is an opening for something true to rise. This is embodiment, not perfection, not performance, presence. And presence is the most radical thing you can offer a world addicted to speed and noise. Presence is how you become medicine, not by trying to save others, but by living from your truth unapologetically, quietly, unshakably. So if you're wondering, but what do I do now? Start there. Start with the ordinary. Make your tea slowly. Watch how the sunlight hits the wall. Speak truth in small rooms. Be the version of yourself that no longer needs to prove anything, because you finally believe that your being is enough. And when the world rushes around you trying to pull you back into its storm of urgency and comparison, you pause. You root. You return to that still space where the self first spoke, and you listen. You're not here to go viral. You're here to go deep, to build a life that doesn't just look good but feels real, that honors your paradoxes, that welcomes your whole self to the table, shadow, soul, ego, and all. That's the gift of ego death. It strips away what was false so that what's real can breathe. You don't have to chase life anymore. You get to live it, fully, softly, wildly, in all its mess, all its mystery, all its quiet magic. If this journey has resonated with you, if even a single word landed in the space behind your eyes, thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to meet yourself. And if you'd like to keep walking this path together, to stay close to conversations that don't flinch and truths that don't sell, consider subscribing. Not because I asked, but because a part of you knows this is home.